Out of the shadows in corporate America. It is 2009, and I realized that I was giving most of my life's energy to my company. I was climbing the corporate ladder and trying to present this image to the world of a guy who's got it all together. I knew something was wrong in my life, and I didn't know what it was. Later that year, I got a new job within my company, and I was responsible for community relations. As part of my job, I started to visit with hundreds of nonprofits that my company donated money to. Let me tell you about one of those meetings and what happened to me that day. It's an early morning, and I leave my office, and I drive a few miles outside the city of Midland. I get out of my car, and I begin a slow, long walk up a very long driveway to a very big white house with very large pillars. I am sweating, and I'm having a really hard time breathing as I approach the door. As I try to open the door, it is locked. I knock on the door, and a voice comes on the speaker and asks me my name. I hesitate. I take a deep breath. I didn't want to give my name. And I finally say, Rob Valentine. And she pushes a button and the door is unlocked. I walk into the waiting room. I sit down and I wait for the executive director. My legs are shaking, and I'm doing everything possible not to run out of the building. This building is Shelter House, an agency committed to providing support, shelter, and counseling to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. The director takes me for a tour of the building. We pass all the individual counselors' offices, and then we meet to discuss the incredible programs that they put on for survivors. My hands are sweaty, and it's really hard to breathe. You see, what the executive director didn't know that day, and what I was not able to tell her, was that 12 years prior, at 36 years of age, I had gone to Shelter House for counseling because I needed help in dealing with the sexual assault that I endured as a child. I had already made the longest walk of my life to the front door of Shelter House. I had already buzzed that same door to get in. Let me now tell you about my first experience with Shelter House. I had to get professional help to get out of the darkness, to unpack the layers of denial, and to uncover the memories and the pain that I had buried for the first 36 years of my life. My therapist from Shelter House and I worked through a workbook that had exercises and songs that she had written. The songs in the workbook were to give me as a survivor the opportunity to heal, to move forward in my life, and to leave the dark remains of my childhood behind. I'd like to read a few of the lyrics from the song, It Never Affected Me. Except for all the trust I've lost, it never affected me. So you see, while singing this verse, I acknowledged to myself that I never trusted anyone. Therapy taught me it was okay to trust and to ask for help. Except for all the pain that I've carried down through the years, I've come to realize that as I talk about the pain with other men that are survivors, it lessens and no longer controls my life. Except for all the shame I've had, it never fazed my world. When I experience shame, it tells me not that I made a mistake, but that I am a mistake. I would sing these lyrics over and over again, and many times break down with fits of anger and rage, and ultimately tears, as I more fully understood how it did affect my life. While working with the same counselor at Shelter House, I realized that I had grown up with 3 rules: don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. You see, don't talk, men don't discuss personal stuff. Don't trust, you can't even trust your family, much less anyone else. And don't feel, men don't do feelings. I began to realize that I could no longer live with these dysfunctional rules. I was angry and feeling the daily impact of the sexual, physical, and emotional abuse that I had endured as a child. Pain, flashbacks, fear, sadness, anxiety, and shame were hounding me, I could be in a room with the people who matter the most in my life, or in a room with 1,000 people and still feel completely alone. This pain affected me so profoundly that I considered suicide during my teen and early adult years. During one of my counseling sessions, I remembered one specific incident in college where I was in my 12-story high-rise dormitory. And one evening, I was leaning against the window screen on the 10th floor and thinking that this could be a way out of the darkness. No one at this stage of my life would have ever thought I was in so much pain. I learned from a very young age to hide it from everyone, including myself, even when my life was collapsing all around me. What I've come to understand that in my darkness, there is no light. The feeling is that there is no way out of the darkness. It is during this time in my life that something inside of me said, ask for help. I had to tell someone about my pain. Counseling gave me another chance at life, a chance to walk through the pain, to tell others about my pain, to release a piece of the pain so that I can breathe. I don't think I breathe when I'm in the darkness. I have to remember to breathe. I have to remember to call someone, to meet with someone and connect, to let them know that I'm in pain. As we know, life has a tendency to get busy when you're building a career, a wife, 4 kids, and 2 dogs. So I eventually stopped going to Shelter House because I had convinced myself that everything was fine. So I put all the secrets back in a box. Fast forward to 2010, and I recognized during that business meeting and that tour of Shelter House, with the way my body had reacted, the shaking, the difficulty breathing, and the anxiety, was actually my body telling me that I needed more help and more support. Being back in Shelter House had shaken loose that box where my memories of my pain from my past were held. Later that year, I found a male survivor therapy group, and I drove 120 miles weekly to Detroit to begin the next phase of my recovery. During one of those sessions, one of the men told me about a weekend of recovery for male survivors. Later that year, I attended a weekend of recovery for male survivors in Ohio, and there were doctors and businessmen, there were lawyers, construction workers, some unemployed, some young, some old, and everything in between. All 25 of us had survived childhood sexual trauma, and we were all a part of a club that we never wanted to be a part of. For me, there was incredible healing that happened that weekend where I was able to come together with other men against all societal norms and begin to talk about my childhood sexual trauma in an effort to regain hope, to heal, to cry, to yell, to sing, to dance, to play. I learned during this weekend that I was exhausted. I realized that as a survivor, I had always tried to control the world around me, or at least the perception that the world had about me, and it is flippin' exhausting. A year later, the crisis at Penn State was all over the news. Penn State was rocked by the revelation of the sexual abuse scandal. You know, I couldn't look at a newspaper or turn on the radio, a TV, or my computer without hearing about it. We had TVs throughout our corporate headquarters that gave internal announcements and breaking news. I couldn't go to a meeting or to the cafeteria or go anywhere in these buildings without hearing or seeing the story. One day I walked into a coworker's office and I shut the door. As is usual, my coworker said to me, "How you doing?" I had to make a decision to be honest or to hide like I did for most of my life. I couldn't hide it anymore. I paused. I thought to myself, do I just answer, "I'm fine, how are you?" Instead, I said, "This Penn State scandal is really hard. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse." We both sat in silence for what felt like an hour. He looked me in the eye with tears in his eyes, and he said 3 very profound words that changed me forever. He said, So am I. I learned that day, as my colleagues said, so am I, that a miracle of healing happened for me within the walls of corporate America, a place I never thought I would ever talk about being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I now realize that there is incredible power in my story, in our stories, and we don't know where it will lead us until we tell it. At the end of the day, I really believe my story is a story of hope, because in working through the pain with counseling with organizations like Male Survivor and Men Healing, the Men's Story Project, and unwavering support from my wife, my kids, and friends, and with a strong faith in God, I have found my purpose. In 2018, after years of therapy and recovery, I was ready to tell the rest of the story. The intersection of my corporate life and my healing began as I made a bold decision to share my story publicly at a diversity conference in corporate America. I walked onto this huge stage feeling like I was carrying and wearing a backpack full of rocks. But after that experience, I realized that I had lifted that burden by telling my story. I removed many rocks that day that I had been carrying around my entire life. As I concluded this talk, all 500 attendees from 33 different countries rose to their feet, giving me a standing ovation. And I asked myself, why are they standing up and clapping? Didn't they just hear the horrific story about me being a victim of childhood sexual assault? I then recognized that what they heard and experienced was hope. They experienced courage, authenticity, and vulnerability in what I had shared about my mental health journey. They connected to my story because they, their friends, or family had similar experiences. The sharing of my story made it acceptable for others to open up. For 3.5 hours following my presentation, more than 70 of my colleagues stood in line to acknowledge their own stories, to offer thanks, and to share about the impact of their mental health challenges and trauma on their lives and their families' lives. I have gone on to share my story now with thousands of additional employees and community members around the world. They in turn have began to share their story with me and with each other. I am continuing to learn that the stigma that I had around being a victim of sexual assault and my mental health challenges can be broken by sharing and addressing my once hidden childhood, showing that I can create a safe environment by talking openly if I so choose. I once heard someone say that when we spend time with our secrets, we are lonely because our mind is full of the secrets. But when we let those secrets out and begin to heal, there is more room for love, more room for joy, and more room for peace. I want to close with the opening of a speech that I gave when I was 12 years old in 7th grade. Here's how the opening went. Jimmy doesn't cry out loud anymore. Tears roll down his cheeks, but he doesn't make any noise. After years of abuse, he has learned to avoid getting his face smothered by a father who doesn't like to hear him cry. Child abuse is an act of violence in our society that needs not to be ignored. You see, no one at the school heard my words. They didn't ask me if Jimmy was really me, or how was I doing, or if I needed help. I stopped trying to reach out. Today, I choose to say that speech differently. I cry out loud now with a story of hope. Tears roll down my cheeks, and I'm realizing that I don't have to be silent anymore. After years of recovery, I can show my face with a smile as I voice my journey of hope and healing. My sexual assault was an act of violence that I will no longer ignore. Thank you.